This week on the TT Show, we talk about the global IT outage caused by cybersecurity company CrowdStrike, the delay of the RTX 5090 and Zen 5, PS5 Pro announcement rumors, NVIDIA 4000 series GPUs are overheating, and games getting a fresh coat of ray tracing paint. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the TT Show. My name is Jak Connor. I'm a hardware editor over at Tweaktown, and today I'm joined by my co-host,
Kosta Andriadis, gaming hardware editor at Tweaktown.
Hello, hello, hello. Blue screen, blue screen, blue screen.
Yeah. It was like a Friday afternoon for us here in Australia.
Where were you when the blue screen of death happened globally?
It was pretty much like we were wrapping up for the day. Like, I mean, because Friday, like 5 p.m. around then, it was just like all these reports coming in of like there's something happening. There's an outage. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. And then we started looking into it, and yeah, because basically it was overnight in the Northern Hemisphere, but in Australia it was kind of like peak time for the weekend. You know, people were finishing up work. That's peak time for like airport as well. So, you know, people either going back home or heading somewhere for the weekend or whatever the case is. And yeah, like supermarkets, etc., and chaos.
Yep, chaos ensued. For those that don't know what we are talking about, by now you've probably heard of the cybersecurity company CrowdStrike and possibly the global IT outage, which is, I mean, it's still kind of unfolding. It's still being repaired right now, but it's being called the largest or biggest IT outage in the history of IT. And
did you know the name CrowdStrike before?
No one knew who CrowdStrike was before this.
No, me either.
No one. And it was funny. Like,
I mean,
we were
unless
saying,
you're like in the industry, yeah. Unless you're like a cybersecurity expert or whatever. Like,
oh yeah, of course, yeah. I'm sure CrowdStrike knew who CrowdStrike was before this, but that's about it. But yeah, back to Friday. That is when the event started to unfold, and funnily enough, I got in my mate's Snapchat group. One of them works for Centrelink as he's a phone guy.
Yep.
And he's like, I think this was it might have been like 3:30 in the afternoon. He sends a Snapchat and he's like, Windows is down. Get to go home early. Sweet as, get paid for the rest of the day. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. Windows is down at Centrelink. That's so weird. And then like 2 hours later or so, we start to see the reports coming out like global IT outage. And then they just start stacking. Airlines down, people stranded at airports, emergency services down across multiple states in the US,
like
hospitals suffering from disruption, train services, supermarkets, and actually, not funnily enough, but Australia was hit probably the hardest.
Because of the timing, right? Yeah. Because like it was like, let's say about 2 a.m. in the US, right? Or whatever time in Europe as well. But in Australia, like when we started, it was like about 5 p.m. on a Friday.
Yeah.
Right. As the weekend was kicking off. So you've got just absolute chaos.
It was. We are going to get into all of the details of why this happened. The nitty gritty of the update that caused this. And I think a good place to start is CrowdStrike themselves. So what this company is essentially a malware company for enterprise companies, essentially. Like, it's not really used by consumers, right?
Yeah, like for consumers, right? So like most people run either Windows Firewall, Windows Defender. Like on top of that, then you've got Norton,
McAfee,
VPN services, McAfee, and AVG, and all these like malware bytes. You know, there's the basic sort of like consumer-facing antivirus and software, like all those antivirus software that used to be just purely about viruses back in like the late 90s and 2000s, have basically all just I mean, adapted to the modern environment, which is all about network-based security, which is like either VPN or like monitoring firewalls and like all that sort of stuff, packet traffic. They all have that sort of feature, and CrowdStrike is essentially essentially that for like Windows devices that are on a network to be able to just continuously monitor network security. So basically, monitoring like all packet traffic going in and out to a system.
Yep, identifies threats, targets them, and implements prevention techniques to stop new threats emerging. It's essentially a antivirus software for large-scale networks. Say if you're running a company with 1,000 Windows machines and you needed all of these Windows machines connected across one network so you can move data from machine to machine. Say you're in like a development production line for a game. I'm working on the assets for, the 4K assets. I'm an artist. They're finished now. I need to move them to Kosta's machine. And we've got an Ethernet cable across. Well, it's all linked into a massive server.
Yeah, so like
I can move it straight to Kosta's machine at a very, very fast pace. CrowdStrike comes in and goes, it's kind of like the overseer director of the entire
You've got
server.
Like 1,000 PCs in your business. You're a bank, right? And that's just in one city. You've got 1,000 PCs. So you've got your enterprise Windows license. You buy in bulk, and then you have your security, enterprise security, which is in this case CrowdStrike, and it's like one of those companies that you don't really. You don't even need to know about really because it sits at a it works on a different level. Like it doesn't need to advertise to the public. Like you don't need to see CrowdStrike ads because like it's not.
Yeah, it's business to business, not business to consumer. So what happened on Friday was CrowdStrike rolled out an update to its Falcon sensor, which is the product that is monitoring all of the network traffic. And within this update was faulty driver files. And these files, they, they kind of nuked everything at once. Which at first I thought was funny because it was like, oh crap, like maybe 1,000 Windows computers is down. And then it started to mount, like I heard Kohl's close its doors because all of its point of sale systems were down. And I'm like, oh no, this is bad. This is not good. Stock exchanges were halted because why are they running on the like stock exchanges had to stop. And I'm like, oh okay, no, this is getting worse and worse and worse.
This will be a bit before your time, but Y2K. So in the year 1999, before December 31st, 1999 rolled over to January 1st, 2000.
I've heard about this.
It was all over the news, right? Like people were panicking because computer systems were running off date systems that were just 2 digits, right? So like 99 becomes zero for 2000 instead of like the actual 4-digit year. And for banking systems and things like that, people were going, oh, this could cause absolute chaos if all these computer systems think that it's the year 0, what's going to happen? And so like all over the news, there was like, the Y2K bug, the Y2K scare. It was basically like airlines are going to be, all the planes are going to be grounded. Banks aren't going to work. Supermarkets are going to close. Basically all this stuff that happened for a few hours with the CrowdStrike was basically Y2K. But the Y2K thing was like, like a little patch that they could update and fix and was blown out of proportion before it happened. It was like they're preemptive. They resolved the issue. But like it was kind of like all of that stuff of like, it was almost like a conspiracy theory. It's like, planes are going to be grounded. But it shows you essentially like my point is that like it shows you that like it's something as simple as something you've never heard of failing.
Yeah.
That is seemingly innocuous of like just monitoring network traffic. But if it causes like widespread system failures, it shows you that, like because we're reliant on everything like supermarkets, point of sales is all network based. It's all your card, your phone, one tap and go. All these conveniences are all reliant on these very complex systems, but like, you know, if there's just a small little failure, it can just bring down almost society, right? Like, you know, if there's no trains, there's no planes, there's no way to buy groceries. Like, you know, it's not like a doomsday prepper, like saying like, you know, this is going to happen, blah, blah, but it just shows you that, yeah, it can happen.
It absolutely can happen. This event is an example of the frailty of how frail society is in terms of IT, and like essentially a server went down in the US somewhere and I couldn't go into Coles. Like,
yeah,
that's what happened, and it's like, wow, like we're in Australia. That's on the other side of the planet, and a server didn't go down. They rolled out an update, but we should get into why this was so catastrophic. And if people are trying to make comparisons, and maybe they should, of antivirus software and CrowdStrike, what CrowdStrike provides businesses. They're probably thinking, well, when Norton crashes on my computer, why is my computer not going into blue screen? So we should explain that. CrowdStrike, and this is raising a lot of questions for how much access third parties have to Windows machines. So CrowdStrike's Falcon sensor is running in kernel mode. And for those that don't know, a machine is divided into two sections. For I think it's bifurcating different types of code. So you have kernel code and user code. So user applications, your Spotify, your Photoshop, OBS, what we're using to record this. This is all running in user mode. This is what you see on your Windows desktop. Kernel mode is all necessary code for the hardware within your machine to communicate with each other. We're talking all of your firmware, all of your motherboard drivers, all of your CPU drivers, your GPU drivers, all of the handshakes that are done before even Windows is presented to you. So why does CrowdStrike have access to a kernel level, at a kernel level? So CrowdStrike argued that it's software, for it to work perfectly across the entire network, it needs to be in kernel mode, because the software needs a top-down view of the entire system network. And within kernel mode, you are able to do this. You're able to see all of the code being executed across the user mode, and essentially is a bird's eye view of the entire network. And from it being at this vantage point, it's able to identify any new threats, etc., etc. However, when a fault happens in kernel mode and is identified, it is a critical system error. The Windows is set up in a way that if it identifies a fault in kernel mode, it will automatically shut down to prevent any further damage, because if there is rogue faulty code, it could lead to further faults. We're talking physical hardware damage, maybe irreparable memory loss of some of your other components.
But then it's also like it can just throw a system into like a weird loop of just compounding errors. And yeah, it's like you said, like the reason for it is to, I mean, especially for security, is to bypass all the additional layers. So like the best way to think about it is like a layer, like stuff that runs in kernel mode or system level has full access to your hardware and components.
Yep.
And, Windows sits on top of that. And then you got software or user software, like applications, like you said, like Spotify, that sit on top of that. And, the lower the level is, the less susceptible it is to hacks, right? So let's say like you had a piece of malware that loaded when Windows loaded, right? So then any app that loaded after that was basically, compromised.
Yeah.
Because that's where it sits in the sort of like the stack.
In the stack, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, kernel mode is like, it's not unknown. Like there is, I think it's like Apex. No, there's a couple of games now that are having to install like the anti-cheat software or the anti-cheat stuff. It runs at the kernel level now for games because you've got like bots and like, aim hacks and things like that sit in the Windows layer or before the game loads. And so like they have to Well, not they don't have to, but like, their solution is like, well, we've got rampant cheating in Call of Duty or whatever the case is, or Counter-Strike. So we have to run our anti-cheat software in kernel mode. Now, the bad side of all of that is that Microsoft is kind of like left in a weird spot because it's like they have to give, to be as ubiquitous as Windows, they have to give like security companies or like app developers and software developers that ability to run things at a system level. It's not a closed system like Apple or things like that. But, this is why when you install something that is specific to that, it will say like, you'll have to agree to, Windows will say like, are you sure you want to install this software? Like, that the Windows pop-up that says like, almost like an admin level, like, are you sure you want to install this?
Because consent.
Like the consent, like access to the kernel mode. So the byproduct for CrowdStrike, at least initially, is that the general public sees it as a Microsoft error, a Microsoft issue.
That's exactly right.
But even though it's like CrowdStrike is given this advanced access to all the system level software, like the kernel mode and all that sort of stuff, most people aren't going to give the situation enough attention to learn what that is, let alone be able to understand that like it isn't necessarily a Microsoft, quote unquote, like they didn't cause the issue.
And we should talk about why it isn't. Well, I believe, I suppose I'll leave my opinion at the end. So Microsoft is essentially handing off responsibility for this outage because of a deal that they made back in 2009 that echoes very similar arguments made against Apple. Funnily enough, like the iPhone 15 series and anything above will feature a USB-C because the European Union sued Apple for anti-compete over the Lightning connector, and essentially saying that the only reason that you have the Lightning connector is to make money. You need to make your ports in your iPhones USB-C, so all third-party cable manufacturers, et cetera, are able to have a competitive market with your device. And if you refuse, then we ban your device. The exact same argument was made in 2009 to Windows about enabling kernel level access to third party to third parties in general.
To all things. So before, I think Microsoft had deals with like security companies for like, because for enterprise and businesses, like, businesses, even if they're like, if your business is large enough, right, and you've got your own IT department, and then you can also run your own scripts and software, especially for Windows Server editions and things like that. And so, so even like, their own internal developers should have that access, and Microsoft would have deals to be able to have a version of Windows or whatever license where, you can bypass, or you can run things or get to that sort of like system level architecture for software and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whereas this EU decision is essentially saying, like, going back to the game things like Electronic Arts, EA, now you have kernel access, or like, whatever, just like some random app developer. Like, we've now got kernel access. All we have to do is just, when somebody installs the app, is just press yes, which everybody's going to do without second guessing.
Yeah, I agree with. I can see both sides, right? Like, I think it's great that everyone has kernel level access, but when you're talking about a massive infrastructure system and a catastrophic failure such as this one, I really do lean towards it being almost a monolithic kind of design like Apple, where they're closed off system at the same time. So I can see both sides. So it running in kernel, the update was issued. The update specifically, because a lot of people are saying, it's like, well, why doesn't Windows just reboot without this faulty driver, which is causing the blue screens of death? Unfortunately, when this kernel level driver has been marked as a boot start driver, so what that means is it's in the name, right? When you boot the machine, this driver is activated. The Falcon sensor is activated, which contains the faulty driver update. And yes, that is why 8.5 million Windows machines were thrown into infinite boot loops. Yeah, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. As soon as the update hit the systems, when users went to boot the machines, it would boot to a blue screen because it would detect the faulty driver, and then reboot, and now there's nothing that you can do because you can't roll out an update to these machines because you can't get to Windows. So
it's not a remote fix, and that's the big thing as well, is that a lot of IT support is remote, right? And it's understandable. Yeah,
that's the point of CrowdStrike.
For businesses, there is you've got TeamView and all those sort of programs where IT support can just take over a local machine and install updates. You don't need to step somebody through the process. So if this was a case of if these machines were able to boot up, people could have remotely resolved the issue. But the thing with this sort of issue is that this one specifically was a simple fix, right? Because Windows has a there's a failsafe for if things get funky in the kernel mode or at the system level, there is a way to recover a system. Windows recovery mode has existed for a while now. And
safe mode.
Yeah, we all know safe mode from Windows 98 and 95 and all the way back to XP had a safe mode. Essentially that just loads almost like an MS-DOS thing. It just loads very basic drivers, like a basic graphics
It's the bare
driver.
bones. It's like your display driver, I don't even know if it does your audio driver, but it's like your display.
It's just whatever default Windows drivers are for display and input, generic drivers. And it gives you a basic low resolution version, or now it's 1080p, whatever version of Windows, basic display driver. And then you have access to control panel device drivers and also
File Explorer.
Yeah, and with the CrowdStrike error, it was a simple fix of being able to get into that mode, which is not difficult, but it requires somebody on site, and just deleting a couple of files, because it turned out that the CrowdStrike thing was essentially just those driver files, data files were just basically just referencing memory that doesn't exist, or just bad whatever thing they were doing, and then essentially if you just deleted them, the PC would boot.
Yeah,
then they could roll out a proper fix, because it was basically that wasn't the end of it, right? There's stuff that needs to happen beyond that, but that was just to get these PCs booting up, and we're talking about millions of computers, so you can imagine Friday night in Australia, all these systems are down, airplanes or airlines, supermarkets, banks, etc. So what that required was, in a supermarket, you walk into your local supermarket, do you think there's a IT person that sits there in a back office waiting for issues to happen?
No.
An on-site person? No. It's one person that handles, 5 different suburbs in a 20-kilometer radius or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Somebody that can actually go on site. So then you've got all these, a handful of people that are just going to have to go around updating hundreds and hundreds.
And it's not even an interesting fix either. It's not even thought provoking. It's reboot the system 15 times until it enters safe mode, and then you log in, go to a file directory, go to the C drive, find CrowdStrike, go to the driver updates, delete any file that has
this file name,
X file name, and reboot. And now you're good to go. And then you do that across the 1,000 systems that you have in your game development studio.
Around, and you're just doing it all night
long,
all weekend.
So let's talk about why this was a failure on CrowdStrike's end. So we've ruled out Microsoft. I believe, I suppose I didn't give my opinion. Microsoft, I think, has a duty of care, even though they have opened up the kernel. Well, they did open up the kernel level access to all third parties. We're still on their platform. WHQL drivers stands for Windows. What is it? Windows Quality Labs Assurance or something like that. This is a certificate that is awarded to drivers that pass the certification test. We see these all on GPU drivers all the time. This is the process is NVIDIA has new drivers. They're not released to the public yet. They send them off to Windows. Windows runs them through I'm guessing a large sample size of various computer specs with like different hardware. Once all of like the driver is stable across all of those pieces, all of those individual systems, it is then rolled out to the public.
Right. But it all it means is that it just like to get it to its most basic level, it just means that it just installs and it runs, right? I remember like being burnt by like this is like a tangent, but back in the day, Nintendo games used to have a official seal of quality on them. Like it's a stamp on every single game, like Nintendo's official seal of quality. And it was just like a gimmick, right? But like it was very similar. All it meant was that the cartridge, when you put it in, it would turn on. It had nothing to do with the game. Like, because I remember looking at like, hey, this game is crap. Like it's a terrible game. Why has it got the Nintendo official seal of quality? And like in this case, it's like, you know, why is this like why has this got the Windows certification for like this app or this driver update, even though it's like causing my system to crash occasionally or games to whatever. Or
there is instances of it still providing problems.
Yeah, like Microsoft's thing, like the certification, like even for like games or apps or drivers, like the certification isn't to the extent of them looking at to see what it does, how it does it, how it runs, how stable it is over time. It's all it is just to mean that it compiles and it installs to the guidelines set by Microsoft for a Windows app. Like there isn't like a quality check is what I'm getting at. Like it's not testing to see like whether it's going to cause issues down the road or things like that. They can't. Like to do that for every single thing would require a massive, massive team.
It would be. And I don't think the turnaround time on these driver checks is very quick. However, I do think that it is an important point in the case of the CrowdStrike thing, because if class action lawsuits are lodged against CrowdStrike and Microsoft, it is going to, I think, be a big point in their argument is the Falcon sensor for CrowdStrike did pass WHQL certification. However, the update that rolled out didn't. That wasn't sent to WHQL.
That's right. Well, that's the thing. Sent. Like if you, because like what happens then is that they have to wait for Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about GPUs constantly on this show. Like it's one and on Tweakdown. That's one of the main things. Like computer hardware. Now a new GPU driver, there's the Windows certified, whatever WHQL version, and then there's non-WHQL drivers that get released as beta drivers. Like Intel does it, NVIDIA does it, AMD does it, and usually they're for hot fixes or like quick updates. And the reason they do it is because they might identify something and it's just a minor update. They're not going to go through the certification process again with Microsoft because they have to pay for that. And it takes time. So then like if you release like a hotfix driver, right, and it's a non WHQL version, you can still release it for your software or app or whatever, but it just means that it's not certified. And then when you go to install it, Microsoft, like there is a check in Windows to say like this is not blah blah blah. Do you sure you want to install it? Yes. So like like that's not unusual is basically what I'm getting at. So like even for like a enterprise security update, and it's like, whoa, why wasn't this certified? Why didn't you certify it? It's because they don't certify every single update. It's usually just major ones. There's ones that just change one or two things, like this one did, and this is why this was relatively easy to resolve by like safe mode, deleting a couple of files, because it was a minor update. It wasn't like CrowdStrike Falcon version 3.0, which changed absolutely everything about how it worked and required a rollback or, whatever the case is, because it was just like a minor update. So that's why it wasn't certified.
Yep.
That may not be exactly 100% the reason, but that's like usually what happens with these sort of updates.
Yeah, I just think there should be a bit more due diligence when you're operating at a kernel level.
Yes.
and you have such a large amount of systems riding on your software, and the result of it not being properly certified or validated, because look, Microsoft might have been able to catch this bug that was in the thing if it was certified, and I think there should be a bit more responsibility in
it could have failed
on
that process
on
works.
Microsoft's side and on CrowdStrike's side. But we should talk about Microsoft is partially responsible. I think they can't just wipe their hands with this scenario and be like, hey, look, we signed a deal in 2009 that opened up kernel level access to everybody. It's like, this is still your platform, and you can't just abdicate all responsibility from this, especially if there is class action lawsuits lodged against them. Who is mostly responsible is CrowdStrike, because their internal testing of their updates should have flagged this problem before it even was rolled out to the public, and we should talk about why. So the way this is set up is the naming is kind of confusing. So I'm just going to read from my article here. CrowdStrike's Falcon sensor, the software that was updated and ultimately led to the global outage, uses what is called sensor content, which is a software that defines what Falcon sensor is capable of. The software is updated with rapid response content, which is designed to enable the software to detect and collect information on any new threats. So Falcon is updated with rapid response content, which I'm guessing would be some kind of like, oh, there is a new form of malware out on the internet. And it's targeting this aspect of the code within our security. We roll out a rapid response content package. Now we get into a bit more of the nitty gritty. Further into the weeds we go. Sensor content relies on what are called template types, or lines of code that include predefined fields for threat detection engineers to use with rapid response content. So these template types contain my bad here. The template response content, or the new detection information for the software, is delivered in template instances, which can change the behaviors of the software, such as granting it improved detection, identification, and prevention capabilities. Now, this is where this is the lead up to the mass outage. So in February 2024, CrowdStrike announced the Inter-Process Communication IPC template type. On March 5th, it passed testing and was released as a template instance. 3 additional IPC template instances were released between April and April 24, and 2 more on July 19. One of these included the bullet that brought down the 8.5 million PCs. CrowdStrike states the IPC template instance that included what it describes as, quote, problematic content data. That's a slight understatement, but rolled out publicly anyway, wasn't picked up internally due to a, quote, a bug in the content validator. So the thing that validates the content that they're going to roll out had a bug.
Yeah, so this is what has spawned. So there's obviously like conspiracy theories going around, right? That this was like a planned, like Microsoft was in on it, governments as well. This is like a planned whatever, like, just to test, to see what happens. Like there's always governments doing everything's on purpose and there's a reason. And then one of the reasons why is because this is, there's a ticking time bomb version, basically what you're explaining, which is like, oh, well, this code has been sitting there for months just waiting for like somebody to do like an update like this that triggers what was already a bug and causes like a massive outage. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, like it was just waiting for the detonator, if you know what I mean? the bomb was already there and it was just waiting for the detonator. Well, which is what happened with this rollout to some degree. To some degree.
I mean, look,
I'm just playing devil's advocate. To use an analogy
here,
like,
Hey, what was that? Sorry?
I was just saying, like, that's just devil's advocate why you've got conspiracy theories.
I read a similar Twitter thread that went viral of a guy that's saying that this code was sitting. I mean, here's a a whistleblower and a cybersecurity researcher. Maybe we read the same thing. He was saying that this code was sitting there for many months now, and the latest update was the proverbial match that lit up all the TNT. I think you could say that about any update to any piece of software that is sitting in kernel mode, because as soon as there's just, I'm not knocking what you're saying. I just think this guy's blown it out of proportion a little bit.
It's always fun.
But yeah, so like any kind of fault that is found in kernel mode will cause and if that driver is labeled as a boot start driver, if Spotify was sitting in kernel mode and it rolled out, it changed everything to blue.
To be honest, like
it would be BSODs everywhere, blue screens of death.
Like this was bound to happen, right? Like if you've used a Windows PC, like you know that there's apps that crash. There's going to be blue screens. Like your Windows, like blue screening. Like and sometimes it's like it can be like a hardware fault as well. Like that causes like blue screens or whatever, or even like a driver crash. Like usually, especially for gamers, we've experienced it because like sometimes like game drivers crash, and they cause like a blue screen.
Yeah.
So for this like happening like this is like it's not like unexpected like especially with,
it's surprising it hasn't happened more.
Yeah, I'm surprised it doesn't happen like constantly.
Yeah. So the bug in the content validator, CrowdStrike didn't elaborate on what that bug was, but it seems pretty critical that the content validator wasn't validating itself, funnily enough. Yep. Yeah, and they didn't actually explain what the content validator is, so we can only take its name. We can only summarize what it does based on its name, and I'm guessing that is to validate any content. I don't think it is deeper than that. And the specific driver fault that was causing the blue screen of death was what CrowdStrike says is an out-of-bound memory read. So these files that we keep saying that you need like to get the machine to work, is this mislabeled system files that were targeting a specific area of memory within the machine. A former Windows developer explains this fantastically in a video. I should get his name because it was absolutely phenomenal. I think it's about a 10 minute long video that you can watch, and he gets down into the nitty gritty of it while also condensing the information into like a digestible format.
Yep.
So, sorry, I just want to get his name here. I got free. I don't know. This is just a sidebar here, but Windows. YouTube keeps telling me that if I keep using ad blocker, I'm going to get banned. So I've had to turn that off, and so now I'm watching ads.
They did some update, like trying to.
Yeah, I'm targeted. So it's Dave's Garage. Dave Plummer is a former.
Oh yeah. He's like a known, like he was like an ex Microsoft developer that worked on like
95 and
95, helped bring 95 to the masses, which kickstarted the modern version of Windows as we all know it.
Yeah.
He was key in a lot of areas. So yeah, it's always good to get if you want to get into the weeds or a really good explanation for exactly what happened. Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, he explains that the update, the files that are triggered this outage, was a simple 0000009C identifier that was just looking for memory where there was none. That was it. It's such a simple.
It's like a switch. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I've got, and I'm sure this is wrong in some ways, but like I've got 32 gig of memory. I want to identify 2 gig of memory, and I've put in the code, like in the code to identify 2 gig. I've got 38 gig. And then the system goes, I'm looking for 38 gig, and it needs to be perfect. It needs to be like 32 and 32, and then a handshake happens.
Yeah, like the way it works.
That's what happened. Then everything went. Everything's like.
Like back in the day when you made a program or like developed like a piece of software, like very like system level stuff, like programming. you would basically program for every memory register on that PC, right? So like you've got your RAM, and like you got 64 gig, but like back then it was nowhere near that, right?
It was 64 megabytes.
Like this part of the program goes into this part of the memory, then this one goes into this, and it's like it's just specific memory addresses, right? And the way PCs work at that level hasn't changed. It just means that that's all automated and stuff like that. So it could be a case of like the CrowdStrike developer, or whatever the case is. It's not like they're intentionally saying, okay, reference this specific memory thing that it's a wrong memory thing. It just could be, like something has gone wrong along the way, because like memory changes for every system to system, but like how that works or whatever the case is now, like is way more complicated. But it's a simple, like, but issues like this are always like simple when they're fully explained. It's like, oh, okay, so all it was just this bit of data referencing memory that doesn't exist, which caused Windows to crash.
Yeah, Doug put in a 9 when he should have put in a 7.
Yeah, that's it, and that's it. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
And then the bug in the content validator didn't pick up that it was a 9 when it should have been a 7. And then they just pressed that big green button and rolled it out to 8.5 million computers. And then they hear Coles is shut down in Queensland. Oh, no.
Yeah, that's right. Then people can't buy groceries. People can't take out money. People can't board a plane to get home for the weekend.
Yeah.
People can't, even like there were like media things like TV stations or like news outlets that their systems were affected as well, like big media conglomerates.
Yes, Sky News went down, or was it Sky or ABC?
It just shows you how fragile it is.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I do have a few questions for you. Now that we've outlined, that is essentially the story. You can obviously go deeper and deeper into it. I really encourage anyone that's interested in why this happened to watch that video by Dave's.
Check out the show notes for this episode, because we've got a bunch of stories up at Tweaktown covering CrowdStrike pretty much as it was unfolding. And as it continues to unfold, there will be more stories that go up. I'm sure there'll be aftermath.
Yeah, there will be. And that is where my questions are. Do you think we are going to see class action lawsuits for any damages lost on, well, just say airlines, right? Like, what happens when 6 out of 7 of the airlines at an airport close for 24 hours? How many millions of dollars do you reckon is lost?
Yeah, in supermarkets. Like, like, I agree. That's the interesting thing that we're going to find out, I think, now. Now it's like a question of like, okay, we know all these services were shut down. Sometimes critical ones like emergency services, government services.
Yeah.
So you can put a dollar amount on most of that, right? Like how much business was lost potentially. But then also there's brand damage as well. Like even if you just, your airline goes down, it's like, well, you're unreliable.
Yeah.
Or even like Microsoft, right? Could be like, what have you done? Like you've damaged Windows. Right?
That is another question that I had. Do you think Microsoft were going to sue CrowdStrike, or do you think they'll stand next to them?
I think Microsoft won't, because it gets a little bit.
Yeah, because it's their platform.
Yeah, it's their platform. Like it gets a little bit grey, I think, when it comes to Microsoft. But I wouldn't be surprised if we start hearing about class action lawsuits tomorrow about the CrowdStrike issue. Like, supermarket chain or business chain or like 3 or 4 airlines are now saying, hey, you cost us X amount. But then what do? Like if they sue CrowdStrike and their systems rely on CrowdStrike, they're going to put them out of business as well. Like there's a catch-22, right? It's like...
Well, I'm sure they're not the only cybersecurity enterprise company. No, we didn't even know they existed. I'm sure there's 500 more.
But the cost of change, right?
Yeah, true.
If you're looking at, like,
you're going to get the same IT blokes to come back in.
Consider how much of a hassle it is for you, right, to format your computer and reinstall Windows and get all your apps and stuff and everything up and running. Like, how much of a hassle that is.
Oh, it'd be an afternoon.
Like, yeah, it'll be like an entire afternoon just ruined, right? Now, multiply that by you've got 10,000 systems that are all running together, reliant on this one security platform. So making the jump to a different one isn't like, oh, we can just use a different one. No. The cost of change for businesses that are reliant that have thousands of PCs that are reliant on one app, right, is pretty expensive. Which brings me to a fun side note, which was the Southwest Airlines, an American airline, that was unaffected. Their systems were unaffected by CrowdStrike because their booking system and stuff like that runs on Windows 3.1 operating system from 1992. And their staff systems or their staff scheduler was confirmed to be running on, or reported to be running on, Windows 95. So they weren't running whatever software security they've got.
It's 29 years old.
Yeah, they weren't running the CrowdStrike platform, right? So their systems were fine. So obviously, but their airplanes might have still been grounded because the actual airport systems were down as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
the FAA, which monitors air traffic, they're like, okay, we got to ground. It was their decision, right, to ground planes because they, if you ever watching movies, when you see the airport controllers, that would be the most stressful job ever. You just got a screen with all these dots, and you got to manage to make sure each one comes in on top. They avoid each other so they can all land safely. Yeah. So if those systems are down, then all airlines, doesn't matter if you're running Windows 3.1 and your systems are fine.
It's so funny. They're running an almost 30-year-old operating system. That's how that must be how much of a pain in the ass it would be to upgrade.
It'll cost them hundreds of thousands, or even who knows how much, and they're just we're not willing to spend that a bit of money.
Yeah, it's 1080, what 720p max res is fine.
That's why Microsoft needs to continue supporting older versions of operating systems. They extend Windows 10 support, 7 support, XP support. They extended XP support for so long, not because it was so popular, and not the fact that it was popular amongst consumers because everybody was running a Windows XP machine. It was because it was popular with businesses, and they had to continue extending support because otherwise their systems would be compromised immediately. We saw, we talked about, it was a few episodes ago or whatever, that somebody did an experiment. What happens if you put a Windows XP machine online without any firewall or security software or anything, and don't even touch the PC, and within minutes it's compromised. People see it online, they can just send bad data to it and then
create an FTP server on it.
Whatever the case. Yeah, run it. Yeah, we saw it, right? So that the cost of change, and it's not because they're lazy. I mean, some of it is complacency. That is a big factor as well. It's that's what we know. We're not going to change. It works.
It's money.
Why, if it ain't broke, why update it?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it does cost a lot. Just not just money as well. It's just time and effort. Especially if you're.
I don't know what is going to happen now. Do you think we're still going to see Microsoft pull back on the level of access cybersecurity companies have at kernel mode? Or you don't think that's going to change at all?
No, but they may have to change their certification process, and they may put a, if there is a non-certified update, that there is a big warning, or that the software security companies have to communicate that to their customers, that, hey, we're going to roll out an update. It's not certified by Microsoft, and it could, and these are the risks. So they may have to just say yes, instead of rolling out an update and then the IT person in that company just clicks okay. You know what I mean? Versus that one will need to be signed off by a CTO or a whole team of people to say, okay, we'll run this update. We understand the risks of a non-certified. I think there'll be processes that change because of this, because this is a huge.
There has to be. There has to be some kind of change. I was also thinking maybe, I don't know if this is even possible. I'm not a programmer, but maybe the update for the driver can be an optional boot start driver. So if it is faulty, it isn't automatically thrown into the boot loop. You know what I mean?
I think what you're getting at, do you think there should be an extra layer of how do you
I don't know how to do. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that.
But if CrowdStrike rolls out a faulty update, maybe that update shouldn't be a part of the boot start driver set, if you know what I mean. Because if the I don't know if you can even do that, but all I'm trying to do is make it so the PCs aren't thrown into an infinite boot loop that requires physical intervention for it to be fixed. So if the update itself was kind of like optional on boot start, or like maybe it was not even started, and once the machine is booted up, you've hit user mode, etc., etc. Then the update comes in. Yes, I want to install this update. Then the IT needs to
it was
do
already
across
installed.
thousands of
And the whole thing with like security software is the one area where this kernel mode access
it's necessary to a degree.
To a degree, because it's then you've just got like better control over what's happening, right? And kernel mode access for everyone. Why does CrowdStrike require kernel mode access? If you know what I mean, like that becomes like okay.
That's for VAC bans, right?
Yeah, it's like ooh, yeah, okay, because it's just stopped cheating. But has it got to that point where Windows doesn't even know what's going on? If you know what I mean, Windows doesn't have control over what the game is doing. But for security software, it makes sense. Yeah, I don't see how you. Like the only way you can avoid this going forward is just to add more checks and balances. It's just to mitigate it. Like, unfortunately, like the only way to try and avoid like another CrowdStrike, like massive like IT outage is unfortunately like red tape. You know what I mean? Like more regulation, more oversight in terms of like updates and things like that. Like for CrowdStrike, it could be as simple as that. Like if we're going to roll out an update. From now on, it requires 4 teams to tick yes, if you know what I mean, and it's just going to waste potentially like everybody's afternoon, like in an entire division, just to go over it and triple check or whatever.
Yeah, essentially, you need like 4 dudes all on different sides of the planet with a key, and then they're like put it in, and they're like 3, 2, 1 over Discord, bang, and
after they've personally like gone through and vetted it, right? You know what I mean? Yeah.
I want to read you this comment. It's just on this Dave's Garage video. So while this is what this user is saying, while this is technically what crash machines, it isn't the worst part. CS Falcon, CrowdStrike Falcon, has a way to control staging of updates across your environment. Businesses who don't want to go out of business have N-1 or greater staging policy, and only test systems get the latest updates immediately. My work, for example, has a test group at N staging, a small group of non-critical systems at N1, and the rest of our computers at N2. This broken update ignored our staging policies and went to all machines at the same time. CrowdStrike informed us after our business was brought down that this is by design and some updates bypass policies. So in the end, CrowdStrike caused untold millions of dollars in damages, not just because they pushed out a bad update, but because they pushed out an update that ignored their customers' staging policies, which would have prevented this type of widespread damage. That is interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Obviously, that's anecdotal. That's a comment.
Yeah,
but it does show you that. So even a company's
own internal roadblocks. Yeah, that's right. Like for updates.
So this company has got like it's like basically you having like 2 PCs, right? And you got one PC that it's running basically all the canary dev mode updates from Windows just to make sure, to see if there's any issues. And you got one that's running the official updates and, and then that PC could crash and you can go, okay, roll back that. You know what I mean? It's just to check to see if that works. And then you apply it on that PC, right? And that's a security measure that a company can, like this person is stating that they've got for all updates, right? So like if there's a security update, we've got like all these non-critical systems that are just running all our programs, running all our, whatever our business does.
Yeah, your day-to-day stuff.
And a lot of businesses would do this, right? And it's like a security measure. It's like, okay, if it works, then we can roll it out. We roll it out to all our users. And what they're saying is that like, well, Microsoft or CrowdStrike in this instance or whoever can bypass that and then just update
Every
if
single
it's
machine.
every single machine, if it's like a tiny little whatever hot fix. Is it like, I go back to gaming terms, but you think about it like a server side hot fix, right? You're playing a game like World of Warcraft or Diablo or whatever the case is, or Call of Duty, and your game isn't even actually updating, right? It's like the server has like a hot fix that updates your game while it's loading. Like you haven't even clicked yes to update in Steam or even confirmed an update, right? It's like a hotfix, a server-side update that can change certain things because it has access to your PC because you're playing the game online. It can do like hotfixes that actually just update the game, and this is like a similar situation where they're just like updating all these PCs without like an IT or a department even signing off on it.
I might send CrowdStrike an email and ask them if they bypassed internal partner policies to roll out this update. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
you can
worth
just
like
ask.
finding out.
And then they'll be like, no, we didn't do it.
But the case...
we didn't do it.
like, this is like the Wild West, right? Like, it could be a case where like everybody's been doing that for decades.
Yeah.
And now it's like, here's case zero of like, this is when it can go wrong times 10 million or 20 million or whatever, like however many, what was it, like 8.5 million was the first estimate for the amount of PCs affected, which is a lot, right? That's it's
strange because this is what Microsoft said in its official estimation. 8.5 million Windows machines were affected, or less than 1% of all Windows or Windows machines. There is apparently 1.5 billion Windows machines, which would make that 15 million, not 8.5. If it's 1%.
Yeah, and also as well,
that's
double. There's no way they know the exact number. I mean, CrowdStrike would know more than anyone else, really.
Yeah, because it's their software that's tripped. So, yeah, I want to ask. Yeah, I'm gonna send them an email after.
Because if Microsoft can only estimate, right? Unless they can, like, if they came out and said like this is the exact amount of PCs, then that would mean that they know that they're admitting that they know more than what they should know in some way. Like, Microsoft isn't responsible for 1.5 billion PCs to a degree of like what apps are installed on it and how they're specifically configured. There is a level of user control and user,
and not every PC could be connected to the internet. Yeah. So how would they be able to tell if that is an activated version of Windows?
Without monitoring every single version of Windows and collecting all user data and stuff like that, which is another conspiracy as well.
That is about all that we have on the CrowdStrike. We have talked about that extensively. But
that's the bulk of the episode. But we've got other stuff.
Yes, let's get into hardware that isn't blue screening or causing blue screens.
Well, actually, kind of some of it is.
Oh, good. Oh, very good. Add to the BSOD issues that are out there.
Yeah, well, actually, let's talk about the Intel stuff quickly. Because
such a dismal episode.
So the world of CPUs is getting a little bit weird. So we talked about it last week. There was like cases of, the flagship 13900K and 14900K CPUs.
Those families,
failing. So there was a case of that game developer saying we're switching all our servers to AMD. And I posted a story the other day. There was another visual effects studio that said 50% of these CPUs are failing, the 13900K and 14900K Intel CPUs. So from now on, any new systems we're going to build are going to be the Zen 5 9950X. And funnily enough, that was like that VFX Studios Australian based, and the game developer the other week was Australian based. It just shows you that sometimes Aussies just cut to the core and say like, your stuff's not working.
I want to say so many things right now.
Yeah, I know, right? It's
I want to just fire off my
just bust out go full Australian and just say,
yeah, I would just kick it back with a pie and just yell. Nah, this is quite a. I mean, I called it one of Intel's biggest failures in years.
So you posted that story about their official statement, which is what I was getting to. So like now that's the update, which is like Intel has come out to say that it's a microcode issue relating to voltage timings, and you can correlate that to too much power going through these like 200 plus watt, because it's only the flagship ones that are drawing a lot of power that having these issues, right?
Yeah.
The 13900K and the 14900K, because these are like behemoths that are just drawing more power than any previous flagship Intel CPU has. So there's obviously something related to that, and Intel's response is that we're saying that it's a microcode issue related to voltage timings, and that there's going to be another update in mid-August. Now, by saying another, is that basically when this issue first started cropping up months ago, companies like Gigabyte and Asus started rolling out their own BIOS fixes to try and curb voltage and things like that. And then Intel said, no, here's the new specifications. And then there's been like 3 or 4 BIOS updates since this issue started cropping up. So this basically means that there's going to be another motherboard BIOS update.
Yeah, what I didn't like about what they did is, and this is all outlined beautifully by Steve from Gamers Nexus, Intel did their official statement on, and I've got it here. Reese, can you put it on the screen for the people on YouTube? And if you aren't listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, you should be for these statements here. So this was the one that most of the press ran with straight away, including myself. I wrote I didn't know about the other issue. This is the response from Thomas Hannaford, an employee at Intel, was posted, I'm pretty sure, to their forums, which is, again, really weird spot to give your first official confirmation that there is problems with potentially, I don't know, millions of your CPUs out on the market.
Yeah.
So, like, you can
it's their
question
flagship, so they're not going to be the biggest sellers, but
this is millions of CPUs.
My thing is that, like, just the brand damage alone, just like,
yeah,
because like we were talking about, like, these is anecdotal. I mean, it's just like single cases, but there are multiple versions of this where it's like a game developer saying we're switching to AMD because these CPUs.
It's not anecdotal anymore. They know. They said.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah,
they said that they knew as well.
But I guess what I'm getting is like Intel's response is like so technical and cold. It's like saying, yeah, we know there's an issue. It's a microcode. There's going to be a BIOS update. You know, wash your hands, wipe your hands, and saying, okay. Like, it's like, hold on a second. You need to come out and like almost like a video and just say, we apologize. This is our flagship powerful CPUs. We understand that there's issues. We're working around the clock to fix them. You know, we're going to give you, if you have an issue with your CPU, we're happy to replace it with one that we've tested. And or if there's like a hardware fault, whatever, like, like they need to like
do more.
This needs to be
They're not doing enough.
Facing now. This needs to be like, you need to get in front of a camera at this point.
Yeah. And also you're talking to customers, that are like, say you're just buying one of these 13th and 14th gen. These are high-end CPUs. These are your power users. These are likely the people that are upgrading every generation because they want the most frames. They want the most performance.
Especially for like gamers as well, like that buy like the 13900K and 13900K. They're buying those and they're running them with 4090s or 3090s, whatever the case is, because they want the absolute best performance. And, and the byproduct of that is instability and crashing.
Yeah, and they deserve a response. Now, I don't like the responses here. I think this is a convoluted way of making your official statement because I'll read an excerpt of this. So, based on extensive analysis of the Intel Core 13th and 14th gen desktop processors returned to us due to instability issues, we have determined that elevated operating voltage is causing instability issues in some 13th and 14th gen processors. Our analysis of returned processors confirms that the elevated operating voltage is stemming from a microcode algorithm resulting in incorrect voltage requests to the processor. Now, from that response,
That's
which is what
jargon.
Hey,
That's technical jargon. There needs to be like an actual apology that's just plain English, just that doesn't go into like the technical details, that just says, we're sorry, we know that there's X, and that, you know what I mean? Like you're just like burying it.
I get that. But from what the press ran with that statement, and then everyone is like, that's paying attention to this story goes, oh, okay, it was the microcode problems that we heard about. I think it was like a couple weeks ago. I think it was Igor as well from Igor's lab that posted about that.
He's come out to say that like that this statement is also like not as detailed as it should be, because it doesn't actually explain what's really happening. And that's the problem as well. Like we're going months now without, like there is no, I mean, there's various examples of these CPUs failing and, causes like around voltage and power and stuff like that, where people are saying like, look, if you do this and the voltage timings and this and that and like power usage, and then there's instability with X and X, but then if you undervolt, and you run the same test, it seems to work fine, right? And then you go, okay, that's a case where that seems to be the issue. But then you've got like failures in like different sort of workloads, different sort of situations. And so there really isn't a definitive thing to say like, okay, this is exactly what's happening. Like all we've got really is now like, okay, this company that has all their game developers, software developers are running high-end 4900K CPUs, and guess what? 50% or more are failing. So now we're just going to swap them out with AMD CPUs. And that's like, like why are they failing really? Like we've got an idea, and Intel's come out to explain, okay, voltage, this and that. But it's not really fully explaining what's going on. Like,
no,
is it a manufacturing fault? Is it an actual like BIOS, like an issue that they need to resolve with motherboard vendors? Because, motherboard vendors are beholden to the CPU, like the BIOS chips and the chipset and the software and stuff like that. It's not Gigabytes or ASUS's fault, if something fails at that level, at the CPU level, if it's like a hardware fault, something like that. Like we don't really know, like it's all still like up in the air, like months after. Like,
well, what is up in the air is this microcode update that's happening in August. I'm concerned that it is going to reduce performance, and even if it is below
it will.
5% because they undervolt the CPU, then I think Intel should offer any owners of the affected CPUs refunds, because they purchased these CPUs for a specific amount of performance.
Level of performance, yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to buy the new 4900K or whatever it is. And apparently the K variants are the ones most affected by this as well, which are the overclocked versions of the CPUs, the raw performance ones that you want, especially for gaming. I bought those for a certain amount of performance. And now there's a problem in your microcode, and you're going to roll out an update in August, and I'm going to get 5% less performance. If the CPU costs like $500, that's whatever the 5% of the total cost is now just taken off of that. So what, you're going to give me like $25 back? Is this how this is going to work? Like, or should I get a full refund? There should be something more than what this is. Another main problem that I have with this is they also took to Reddit in what I can only think is a really strange way to say something about the issue and not have any press pick up on it. But now the press has picked up on it. Hello, Intel.
It almost seems like they're actively trying to
sweep this under the rug.
Like, but like, how can you when it's like every tech site is now like, this is like been ongoing, and like it's not every day, but like every few days, like there's going to be noteworthy stories about it, and almost every single time, like they don't include statements from Intel.
Yeah, and this Reddit post made everything so much worse, I think, at least.
I think so too. Because
This is the worst. So here's what happened. So Lex H, an Intel employee, I'm not sure if his official position or her, so that you don't have to hunt down the answer. This is the post itself here. So you don't have to hunt down the answer. Questions about manufacturing via oxidation as reported by tech outlets. I don't even know what that means. I'm guessing that is the reports that were coming out to say oxidation was a problem on certain Intel desktop processors. So the short answer, we can confirm there was oxidation manufacturing issue that was addressed in 2023, but not related to the instability issue. Now that is very important. That sentence, those words right there, but is not related to the instability issue. The long answer, we can confirm that via oxidation manufacturing issues affected some early Intel Core 13th, so not 14th gen is not mentioned there. 13th gen desktop processors. However, the issue was root caused and addressed with manufacturing improvements and screens in 2023. Great. That means every CPU that was manufactured after the fix should not have oxidation problems. We have also looked at it from the instability reports on Intel Core 13th gen processors, and the analysis to date has determined that only a small number of instability reports can be connected to the manufacturing issue. Hold up, wait a minute. So there was a small number of instability reports that were connected to the manufacturing issue, which was oxidation. But you said in the short answer, we can confirm there was there was via oxidation manufacturing issue addressed back in 23, but not related to the instability issue. Yes. I don't understand. Now, this is a contradictory statement.
Well, I mean, they're basically saying that there were like specific hardware faults with the 13900K, right? And that would have been a very small percentage. So like,
but they can't say that they're not related to the instability issue and then say that they found some that were related to the instability issue.
Yeah, but like they're like it's a very convoluted statement, because what they're saying is that
what the hell does this mean?
They're like let's say they had a failure rate, like a hardware failure rate for these flagship CPUs, and it was a very small percentage because they're not confirming what the percentages are, right? Because like if they were to say that like there was a 0.2% hard manufacturing error with the 1300K, right? And you go, okay, that's X amount of chips that it was a manufacturing issue with oxidization, and you replace them, or you update your process, etc., etc. But like the instability issues that we're seeing now, right? We're seeing reports from some people saying that it's, like pretty much every PC we've got with these CPUs is failing. 50%, 1 in 3. You know what I'm saying? Like that's a huge number. So like you got a manufacturing fault, you're saying, yes, okay, we had that, and it was like, come out and say it was like 0.6%, 0.6 of 1%. You go, okay, that's a small number. But then how these general instability issues, Intel hasn't come out to say that we believe that it's 40% of all CPUs out there.
They won't put a number on it.
Or 50%. Or 60%, because that's the discrepancy they're talking about, right? They're talking about like, yes, there was a manufacturing oxidization issue. Yes. But that was like a very small number. We fixed it. This is not what they're saying, and this is what they should be saying. Because because if you're separating the two, we need to know how big the gap is separating them. And we, based on the reports we're seeing, it's a huge gap, right? You're looking at potentially 50% of a product, of like a flagship product failing, which is
at least hundreds of thousands of individual.
It's unprecedented, right?
Yeah.
It's not like, that is absolutely shocking, right?
And this statement is just, I think, contradictory. You can't say, as soon as you have one 13th gen desktop processor having oxidation problems that related to instability issues, you can't say that there is none. That doesn't make sense. As soon as you have one, you can't say we can confirm there was via oxidation manufacturing issue that was addressed back in 2023, but is not related to the instability issue. So there was oxidation problems They weren't related to the instability issue. And then in the next paragraph, they say, we found a small number that were related to the manufacturing issue. That doesn't make any sense. That is
because they're not.
Just because the number's small, there doesn't anything above zero is now it's contradicted. Now it's wrong.
Yeah, because they're not taking ownership of either because it is like this nebulous thing, right? They're saying the current instability issues, right? They're saying yes, there is instability issues, but they're not saying like how big the problem is, and that's the problem. Like if you don't quantify like how serious it is, then we're just all left to just try and decipher technical jargon.
Yeah.
Okay, voltage, microcode, this. Okay, yeah. But how many are affected? How many like motherboards? Like why aren't you they don't need to release a statement to explain absolutely everything, but they need to get in front of a camera. They need to at least speak to an outlet to say, for somebody to ask the questions, okay, so how many CPUs do you think are affected by this? And then the Intel says, okay, and they need to be forthcoming. Okay, yeah, we believe that it's this percentage of all the flagship CPUs. Okay, so is it a hardware fault? Okay, no, that's there was a hardware fault. We're asking these questions because we're trying to decipher these statements that are just burying facts or burying the like what's happening with just technical information, which is like, okay, that's all relevant, but at the end of the day, like the impact, what's actually happening, like what we actually want to know, like do you really care like that the issue is some microcode in the BIOS? Like this is not the problem. Isn't you understanding that it's a microcode issue with voltage timings or this and that? What we all want to know is like, how did this happen? How big of a problem is it? And how are you going to fix it? And how are you going to respond to criticism? How are you going to resolve this issue going forward? It's almost like a CrowdStrike situation. It's like you can always bury people in like technical information, just like, this happened, and this happened. It's like, well, hold on.
I agree with that. But I also think it's important to to distinguish between a software problem and a hardware problem. The oxidization issue, that is a problem that happens during the fabrication process of the CPU itself. And oxidization will lead to future faults, especially if it's being exposed to high voltage at a prolonged period of time as well. This isn't a problem that you can fix with a microcode update. So I agree with exactly what you said. Yeah, they stop burying us in the technical jargon, let people like me and you sift through it and then report on it to other people, but come out with like a more public facing statement that is for your everyday kind of consumer. Look, the oxidation problem, what they need to do, they don't need to tell me exactly how many processors are affected by that. They just need to give the date range of the when they need to identify the date range of when this problem was detected and inform customers of, say, if it's between April and August, all CPUs 13th and 14th gen that were manufactured between April and August. These are the affected numbers, the SKUs or whatever, because there is the number on the CPU. If you own this CPU, you now have warranty. You can get this replaced. Your CPU may be affected by the oxidation. That's what they need to say. They don't need to say, oh, there's a billion processors affected by this. That's only going to make them look bad, and I don't think that is going to help in any way. They need to go to their customers and say, hey, if we made bad CPUs during this date and this date, here's the numbers, check them. If you do own one of these, you can come to us. We are going to replace it fully with no cost to you. That's what they need to do. That instead of this weird convoluted like Reddit post where it's like, oh, we identified something, but it's not in it. It has nothing to do with it. But we found it.
That's basically just saying that like it's like a one-word answer, right?
It doesn't make sense.
It's just saying yes, no. It's like, well, that's
yeah.
Okay, but
oh man,
but
I don't
why, how? Yeah.
the microcode stuff as well, they need to say if this is going to reduce performance or not. Because I think that is absolute BS if it does. And if it does reduce performance, which I would bet that it is going to within 5%, then they need to offer all buyers of those affected CPUs full refunds. Just straight up. This is how you rebuild your brand. You can't release a crap product, have it literally break, and it's for power users as well. So people that, genuinely give a shit about why they bought that CPU. You don't just go out and buy a 4900K because, I need a new computer. It's like, no. You're buying that CPU because you want to squeeze as many frames as you possibly can out of your games. You need to respect these
or if
these
you're a
buyers.
developer running 3D software and you're
these are your fans.
videos,
Like, these are people that actually give a shit about your product. It's not like, I don't know, your everyday Joe that just picks up a new computer because they want to answer, emails from their partner overseas. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you need to treat these buyers with respect. And I think the way that they've gone about it is hilariously bad and embarrassing, I reckon.
Yeah. And
should be
to move things along, like the side effect of this is the brand stuff. Like I mentioned it briefly, but like Intel is going to have a next gen CPU that comes out later this year, right? Mm-hmm. All eyes are going to be on that. They're actually going to change the name from Core i9 to Core Ultra, but it's still going to be like their flagship is going to be their flagship and is going to be the successor to these CPUs, right? So like all the press surrounding that launch is going to be tainted by this, right?
Absolutely.
And tainted in the sense that Intel will have to acknowledge and respond and field countless questions from everyone saying like, how are you going to mitigate this issue or voltage or microcode? Have you tested that for this new generation? Are there going to be issues? Like, well, how do you foresee that? They're going to a bunch of questions they're going to have to field based on that. And timing wise, this is all coming to a head just as AMD is about to launch Zen 5,
is what I
the new
was about to
Ryzen
say.
9000 series, and breaking today, just before we started recording, is that AMD has come out. They haven't provided full details, but they said because of quality assurance issues or something that has been cropped up in testing, that they are delaying the launch of Zen 5 to ensure that there aren't any issues. And this means that the flagship CPUs are now delayed from the July 31st to August 15th, and now they're going to launch with the 9600X and the 9700X initially, like the more mainstream versions. Now, this is like, it's like, oh, okay, so something's wrong with Zen 5 is like the initial gut reaction takeaway. But I think as well, there's a component of this, which is they're seeing what's happening with Intel, especially with like the flagship. They know that if there is instability issues with
any of their stack,
if there's any sort of controversy surrounding their Zen 5 launch, it's going to get lumped in to this whole mess, right? And they also know as well that like people are now looking to AMD to be like, okay, I'm going to switch to AMD. Like all these reports of people saying, that Visual Effects Studio specifically called out, like you said, the 9950X, the new flagship, right? And it sounds like there is some sort of quality assurance thing happening. And this is extending to actual CPU. It's like a hardware thing because they're recalling all the chips.
Yeah.
Apparently. And apparently reviewers' samples are not being sent yet either because of this issue.
Wait, reviewers don't have their samples?
Yeah, there was a video cards report saying that
you poor buggers.
They got word from CPU reviewers that they don't have their samples.
Oh my God.
Because of this issue that they're delayed.
Bad for all of the reviewers.
And imagine like the logistics for AMD, right? Like you produced all these new CPUs and now you're recalling them, or you're producing more to replace them, or what is like what's happening? Like, are you just binning potentially hundreds of thousands of chips? Like, it's a very vague thing, but like the plus side is that they've caught it before, and they had the foresight to not just go, if it's It could be like a simple case of like 1 in 100 could potentially fail, right? But that 1 in 100 would become 1,000 PCs failing, and stories that just relate. It could be like a PR decision to say like, we don't want, even if it's just going to be a small percentage, but what we're seeing from Intel, let's just do a recall. It's going to cost us millions of dollars. Let's just fix this issue. Let's just launch right? And that could be what's happening.
Has this might be a reach, but maybe there is no problems with the AM, like with the CPUs. Maybe they're doing this as a simple, okay, Intel is on fire right now in terms of instability problems. We're going to say we're going to recall our things because we found a problem and it has been ironed out and doesn't meet our full quality expectations.
Yeah, they're saying initial production units have an issue.
Yes.
Yeah, and an abundance of caution. Like the wording here is very specific, right? Highest quality experience for every Ryzen user. They're working with their channel partners, replace all the initial production units. And this is like, goes back to what you said with like Intel, like, they need to come out and say if you bought your CPU on this date, if it was manufactured on this date, and this is a tool that you can check to see how it is, or you can look at the CPU and read the number, blah, blah,
That's
blah.
exactly what they need.
But this is what AMD is doing. And this CPU is not even out yet. They're basically saying, we produced this initial production run, we produced X amount of CPUs. Do you have them? Send them back. And initial production run could mean every CPU that we've made for the launch needs to be recalled, which it sounds more alarming, right? But you just say initial production run, like, it's the same thing, but like it's sounds less alarming, right? But this is the case, right? But like, you're delaying the launch by multiple weeks, which is like you're expediting all these CPUs back. And then you've got like your second production run ready to ship out. So you're probably already shipping them out, right? Your replacements.
That's what I thought reviewers would have their samples
and then you're waiting
already.
for them, getting all the samples back at the same time. So this just means that this could already be in the works, already has been happening for weeks, because like you're talking about a global launch, right? If delaying it by 2 weeks means that this has already been identified a while ago, and this has already been in motion for a while now. Because
absolutely,
I would think like if it would just been discovered yesterday or a week ago, this launch would be delayed by at least a month.
So what do we do? Do we wait for like? See now,
apparently like this retail units
I was thinking before
there.
With the Intel story, it's like Intel is doing the marketing for AMD's 9000 series launch with all of its just instability problems, crappy replies, poor customer service, it's just lack of replies in general. It's like
conspiracy hat.
Yeah,
AMD's
AMD is just sitting back going, "This is fantastic.
We
have to nail the 9000 series launch." Then this statement comes out, and it's like it doesn't necessarily fill me with confidence about their processes. I was kind of thinking, and like I said before, maybe it is a reach. Maybe they're just doing this as like the final nail in the coffin for this generation's launch, and there isn't actually a problem with their CPUs. They're just saying, we fixed the problem.
Look how that's right. Look how diligent we are in terms of being able to adapt and respond to issues. Or
we already have the tool.
Even if there's the smallest issue, we will recall, we will redo. We want to make sure we 100%. Whereas Intel was just silent, right?
Exactly.
For like ages until they came out with their first response, because it was like the worst thing about like the Intel thing initially was they didn't come out and acknowledge it, right? So what was happening was that companies like motherboard manufacturers were releasing BIOS updates, and there was like, and they were put in the firing line, and then Intel initially started blaming and saying like, oh yeah, they're just running their like, the flagship motherboards.
Their overclock profiles.
The overclock profiles are just insane. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, you were posting these numbers. You loved these numbers in reviews and pre-release material. And because the numbers showed how faster you were than the competition.
These were your favorite numbers.
Yeah, these are my favorite numbers, right? Because like you're saying, like if there's a performance hit on actually resolving the issue, then it's like, oh, okay, so what do? You launch a CPU and you say it's this fast, and every review says it's this fast, and you look how much faster it is in the competition, and then 8 months later you basically gimp it, or like you basically
nerf
nerf
it.
it. Like
You're
you know,
nerfing it,
like
yeah.
like in we go back to games. Like it's like you had your OP weapon, now it's been nerfed.
Everything goes
And
back
you're
to
like, well,
games.
yeah, it's actually not as good as the flagship from the like the AMD or the Ryzen. It's actually not 20% faster than this Ryzen chip. It's only like 4% faster. So you're like, okay.
I really do hope that this is kind of like a PR kind of thing, and that there isn't genuinely a problem with the first batch.
I think it's a small percentage. There would have to be like some, well, like I think it's also ultimately a good news because it means that they've at least identified it pre-launch. Because the last thing we needed is like, I mean, it'll be great for the drama, right? Everybody just going nuts over like Intel CPUs failing.
No, I want a 9000 series
everybody
CPU.
wants the drama. Yeah, same. Like, and I don't want them to fail. Like, I don't want any like, I don't want flagship products to be faulty out of the gate. Nobody wants that.
Yeah, I don't know. I really hope that this is kind of like a stunt and there isn't actually a problem, and this is kind of like a what do they call it, like guerrilla marketing tactic, where they go, it's kind of
By
like,
the sounds of it, it seems like the 9600X and the 9700X are unaffected, so they're just pushing those back like a week just so they're closer to the 9950 and the 9900X. I think those were the ones that were affected, because it's always like the most
the higher
complicated
voltage ones.
It's like like there's more stuff on there. There's more cores. There's more transistors. Like
higher TDP as well.
More. Yeah, the higher power rating. They're just more complex chips.
Yeah. Oh boy, I hope we don't have another oxidation problem. That would be rough. But yeah, we'll keep our eyes on that. The CPU industry is seemingly on fire right now,
and I mean, it's not
looking good.
Any hugely different in the GPU side, but
this is such a depressing episode.
We'll start with let's go through the bad
everything's breaking and on
from
fire.
The world of GPUs. Well, the latest on the GeForce RTX 50 series is that it's now delayed to 2025. Now, I understand the technical, something can't be delayed if it hasn't been officially announced. You know what I mean? But based on internal,
true,
you know what I mean? Like it's you can. So it is. It's more catchy to say it that way. But from what we heard, rumors for months and months was that NVIDIA was going to has locked in with partners a Q4 this year release for the 5090 and the 5080, or at the very least one of those two. And that was going to be the new flagship GPU launch happening this year. And there's already in the works with all their main partners to actually start production and factoring into their timelines. And that was already either locked in or that was, penciled in at some point. And now we're hearing from a few sources, including Copbyte7Kimi, who's a known NVIDIA leaker, who's now hearing that we won't hear about the RTX 50 until CES, which means January.
Yeah.
And that could be NVIDIA doing their own event separate to CES, which is interesting because it means it's going to be longer than a 2-year cycle this time around, which hasn't happened for a long, long time. So, it's been 2 years between the 3090 and the 4090, 2 years between the 2080 Ti and the 3080 or 3090, and before the 10 series. It's been a 2-year cadence of anywhere between September, October, and November, NVIDIA launches their new GPU, their new generation with a flagship. So pushing it back to CES would be weird because they don't usually launch GPUs at the beginning of the year, even though this year they did launch the Super Series in January, so it could be a similar situation. But the interesting side of it is that even if they did launch at the end of this year, they were going to do it alone without any competition, because there's going to be no flagship Radeon that's going to match a 5080 or 5090. There's no flagship Battlemage GPU from Intel, their next gen ones, that is rumored to be anywhere near as powerful as a 5080 or a 5090. So they were always going to be launching this new generation unopposed, if you know what I mean? Which means you're the only company with a gaming GPU this powerful, so you can do what you want and charge what you want, really.
And announce it whenever you want.
And announce it whenever you want. So pushing it to next year is actually kind of strange because there is the latest rumor is that AMD has locked in CES 2025 for their Radeon RX 8000 series to announce and launch soon after. And early 2025 is when Intel has rumored to be launching their desktop Battle Mage. We know Battle Mage is coming to their next-gen mobile chips. They've already announced it, like, the next-gen ARC graphics integrated into the next-gen mobile chips. There's going to be desktop GPU variants that are on track for next year. But those GPUs are only going to be like 40, 70 levels of performance, potentially. And the same with the Radeon RX 8000 series is going to be similar to their current flagships or just a bit below. So if they all imagine CES is like Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA all announcing new GPUs at one event.
I want to go.
Yeah, I was about to say, we need to be there.
We need to be there.
if that's the case. But also as well, NVIDIA love to do their own thing, right?
Yeah.
They would never I don't see them, and if they're going to announce in January, they'll do it. They'll announce at the very end of December or something like that. They'll announce before everyone. You know what I mean? They'll come out and just have their own massive event and they'll monopolize the news cycle for a week at least.
Or
they're not going to just announce one day and then AMD announce the next day, because then you don't cannibalize the
no, you do it on the same
all
day.
The attention, right? There's a PR element to it where it's if we announce 2 weeks before AMD, we know AMD is going to announce here. We announce 2 weeks before. We've got everybody just buzzed, and all they're talking about for this 2 weeks in the industry, or those that are interested in it, is how powerful we are. We don't announce within 24 hours of AMD. Usually, that's how they usually do it.
Usually,
they kind of steer
Anthony
clear
told
of
me
each
a
other.
story. It was 1 year in Computex. I think it was a GPU announcement. AMD was holding their keynote on one day, and then it was just passed along through the press that NVIDIA was holding a special invite-only keynote. It was across the road, and they just booked out the building and invited key press. He went there, and then they unveiled the new graphics card. It completely dominated the news cycle. AMD's announcement was just oh yeah, that's cool. You did a
that's what
people were talking about it. So I wouldn't be surprised if NVIDIA just rocks up to CES, does
and
the announcement
over.
on the same day as AMD and Intel. And it's just
just goes all out.
Yeah, it just dominates. You won't even hear about Intel and AMD's new gaming graphics card. If NVIDIA come out and go here's the 5090, boom, and it's just
but not
this
only that,
monster, world's most powerful gaming
invite.
graphics card.
Make sure all the press are there. You invite them all. You even fly out international ones, and then you give them it's not I'm not saying buttering up, but you get that access of being able to see it firsthand, and then wow them, right? Because we know it's going to be powerful. It's going to be outside of how much these things are going to potentially cost, right? That's a part of it, but that's not the initial wow. The initial wow factor is going to be wait, you can do what? Wait, you can that runs that fast? Wait, it's that much faster? Wait, you've changed ray tracing to now be triple the performance, and look at that. Path tracing now runs natively in 4K. What's going on? You've done there's going to be some element of it that's just going to be okay. This is
imagine they do this right. Where at CES, NVIDIA's event is at 11 o'clock. AMD's event is also at 11 o'clock. Which one are you going to?
Well, I'm going as the gaming hardware editor. I'll take the NVIDIA and you can go to the AMD one.
No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. Every single press is going to be at that NVIDIA event. They will not go to the AMD if it's a Radeon event. They're not going to do it.
They'll reschedule. Yeah, they won't have them at the same time.
Oh, what a dog move that would be, though. If NVIDIA, if NVIDIA books the same time across the street, all the press will just leave AMD and go straight to
because both companies love like timing announcements, right? It's like at like Computex, like AMD's not going to talk about this or that, but they like I mean this year was, even if you look at the keynote, right, it was like Lisa Su was doing the official Computex keynote, right? That's the industry keynote speech and presentation. And then what does NVIDIA do? Jensen, they book out that sports stadium and they're running their pre-Computex keynote. So it's not actually officially affiliated with Computex, right? Because Jensen did the official keynote last year. So it's like they stole AMD's thunder again. Like, like what you're saying, like it's going to happen. Like if they're all kind of like targeting early 2025. I
want to be there.
And expect NVIDIA to, well, I would say like dirty, but like they're going to go like, oh, we're going to make sure we get all the attention because we're going to go all out.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like and base a lot of that, what they're going to do on what AMD or Intel is doing.
It's like when Jensen walks through the Computex showroom floor, and then you hear like a few hours later from some other media guys like, oh, Lisa Su's coming through. Oh, Pat Gelsinger is coming through. Like the Intel CEO and AMD CEO. It's like, well, you're just following Jensen around now. What's going on?
Yeah, you've scheduled to make sure that you're first. You know what I mean? Like NVIDIA's like they just like they
just hear like Jensen's on the showroom floor, and then like Lisa Su's like, should I go on the showroom floor? And they're like, yeah. And then like Pat hears like, oh, Lisa and Jensen were on the showroom floor. He's like, should I go on the showroom floor? It's like they're just following around each other. It's really funny. But yeah, I definitely want to be at CES to see these announcements if they do happen at CES.
Keeping it on the 50 series, apparently NVIDIA is going to bring back Titan.
Oh, so what was the last one we had? Titan X.
Yeah, which is weird, right? Because Titan was kind of like a thing before the 90 class that they created, right? Like it was like the 3090 was like, wait, hold on a second, there's a tier above.
Yeah.
Like people thought it was a 3080, that was it. Right, like the 2080 Ti or whatever that was. That's what it was. So then they introduced the 90 class, which was seen as like a Titan equivalent, right? Because it's like the fully unlocked top die, and so that would kind of like replace, because like previous gen they had launched Titan GPUs, which were essentially similar to like the gaming class GPUs, but they were way more expensive, but they were like fully unlocked. Or basically notably more powerful versions of the flagship gaming GPUs, quote unquote. And from what I understand is that those Titan class GPUs, even though they sold for a lot more, sold way more than NVIDIA expected.
Well, they had larger memory sizes.
That's right. There was larger memory,
much larger
for like
VRAM.
Creators and industry. So like, game developers at the time were buying them, but also like even gamers, like they were surprised that gamers bought them at all.
And correct me if I'm wrong here. They stopped doing the Titan, and that became Ti on the end of on the
3090.
End. Yeah, like so you
3090, the 3090 Ti. But then the thing, because they weren't like for the 30 class, like once you got to the 3090, there really isn't a justification, because that was like double the price of like the 3080. But then like you couldn't get that much more performance out of it again to justify like the Titan branding. And I think with the 4090, they could have potentially done a Titan or a 4090 Ti, but they decided against it because there was nothing to compete against. They would have just been like testing the waters.
Yeah,
just to see if they could.
The way that I thought about it was the Titan branding was like Titan is more it is the most powerful version of what it is. So I thought that they got rid of the Titan standalone graphics card, shortened the name down to Ti. So then you've got a 4070 Ti is like the 4070 Titan version of the Ti.
It's different.
Really?
Yeah. No, it's different. Yeah. Like, because Ti was just like the.
What does Ti stand for?
I don't know. Like, it could even be like Titan shortened, but like Titan was released as like, as basically like a flagship, like Halo product.
Yeah,
like
I tested them. Yeah. I
so
just
like
thought that when they stopped making them, that's what the Ti, because
no, they had like 1070 Ti's and and they had like 960 Ti's or 980 Ti's, and like they had the Ti's before they had Titan. The TIs were always just like the souped up version of the
TI at the end of Titan GPU stands for titanium and indicates an improved version. TI models are titanium.
Yeah, but the actual Titan branded is just like a single GPU that is more powerful than any of the 10 series, 20 series.
But so like, TI does stand for Titan.
Okay, yep. So apparently there was a 4090 version that never, like an Ada Lovelace Titan that was never launched. Reasons around that is that there was probably no real need to do it, especially with the rise of AI and powerful chips. So essentially the 5090 is not going to be like the fully unlocked Blackwell die. So the Titan version of the 50 series will apparently be probably about like 10, 15, 20% faster than the 5090 almost.
Wow.
And that's going to be a beast. And like the report is that like it's actually going to rebrand it again, because like the Titan was initially marketed to like game developers or like media people that needed VRAM or needed that extra bit of power for like rendering and things like that. So the rumor here is that it's going to be called Titan AI. So you've got your gaming class GPUs, and then you've got the Titan AI, which is a consumer-facing GPU that looks like a 5090, but it's going to have more VRAM and unlocked chip, right? So it's going to be Titan AI.
I do like it, because imagine if it was TI AI.
It actually that naming actually is like the point is that like now so now that product makes sense, right? So you've got the 5090 with probably 24 gigs of GDDR7 memory, right? And then you got the Titan AI, which might have like 48 or even 32 or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Faster GDDR7, probably like the fastest available, and it's got like X amount of more CUDA cores, and it can more tensor cores, whatever the case. Like it's a more unlocked chip, and it's Titan AI because it's like you have one of these and you can train your own AI model, complex one, like however hundreds of billions of parameters, you can train it in a day or an hour or whatever the case is, right? So that's what it's marketed as. And then obviously the byproduct of that is that you're a PC gamer with unlimited money, and you're like, well, I'm going to get me that Titan AI for gaming because I've got unlimited VRAM, and I'll be able to get more performance out of the game, right? So there's that byproduct of like NVIDIA also being able to get more money from the people that were going to buy a 5090 that had that that have money to burn. Now they can get even more from them. That's the cynical way of looking at it, but at the end of the day, that's also a decision that would factor into it. So having a Titan next gen will be interesting. Like I don't think that'll launch with the 5090 or 5080. Like all we know is that it exists, right? Like whether or not they actually end up launching one is, that probably decision hasn't been made. But apparently it is a huge GPU because of like the, there was like a 4-slot of Founders Edition cooler that has been leaked around for a while now, like images and people have seen it and stuff like that, and that cooler was rumored to be for like the 40 series Titan Edition GPU that never launched. So this Titan AI GPU could be even bigger than the 4090.
Wow!
In terms of size. Physical size.
That's upsetting, but also, I suppose.
It's just going to be an absolute monster.
Yeah. We are running out of time, so let's jump over to ray tracing in games, unless you had some more on that story there.
Well, let's just do briefly the overheating thingo, because Igor's lab did a test on like a number of 40 series GPUs. So this is another quick one. So let's keep the bad stories going. Like Igor's lab did a report and looking at like a bunch of 40 series GPUs, and essentially found that this was based on like readers and like community members saying like, oh, my GPU is now showing like a hotspot of 100 degrees Celsius or plus, which means they're going to be throttled and things like that.
Yeah.
And so Eagles Lab took like a few GPUs and pulled them apart and saw that that the thermal paste was not only just like thinly applied or whatever the case was, but just had degraded to the point where it's basically doing nothing to help cool the GPU. And thermal paste, as we know for CPUs and stuff like that, is a pretty big component. Like you got to have like that layer of between like the heat sink and the actual chips needs to have like some sort of connecting thing to transfer the thermal. Like, you know, like you got Thermal Grizzly who does like, you know, thermal pads and high quality paste, because it's all about being able to transfer the heat from the chip to the heatsink to the cooling, etc., etc. And then Eagles Lab, like the conclusion, it's very technical. Definitely check out the video if you want to know. Like it includes like insane gear and microscopes and things like that. But the conclusion is very simple. It's this: is that this thermal paste was all these GPU partners from NVIDIA were getting this thermal paste from a supplier, and it wasn't up to code, basically. Basically, they were applying the thermal paste, and for the first few months, initial benchmarks would show that this GPU runs cool, and there's no issues with the cooling, and it's actually performing really, really well, right? But then what happened is over time, because of like particle sizes and like materials and low quality materials, that actually degrades over time. So then after I think it's like about 3 to 4 months of like sustained heavy usage, the GPU then starts to overheat. So it's not something that could have been caught during the review phase.
Wow.
Or even because even if it's a year later, because fresh out of the box, the GPU is going to be fine for months. And there's no way to really test for that unless you pull it apart and put it under the microscope like this, and then sustain and then check one from new versus old and all sorts of stuff. So this could be a potential scandal that kind of like, you know, the 16-pin power connector issue with like overheating and melting. So this could be like a ticking time bomb situation where 30, you know, different, you know, or even hundreds of different 40 series GPU models could be defective and need to be. But the fix, just like the, you know, bring it back to CrowdStrike, is simple, but it requires disassembling the GPU and then wiping it down and then applying good thermal paste and then reassembling, right? And then the problem is solved. It's a problem solved, but that requires, for most people, an RMA process, because most people aren't going to be disassembling GPUs.
No, not at all.
I would say it'd be less than 1% would do that.
Using a microscope to look at thermal paste.
Yeah. And he determined the particle size were way too large for effective thermal paste, for an effective compound, which is like a formula of all this sort of stuff to be able to dissipate heat. And then,
wow,
it's a fascinating report that should definitely be looked into.
That is really interesting. Good on him. That is some really next level testing. We'll put a link to his story in the description below for you guys to read. We should move on to
we'll
the
get
games
to the
because we
PS5 Pro stuff
running
next.
out of time here.
Yeah, we'll get to PS5 Pro next week because that's interesting. Because that would warrant like a big discussion. But like we can close with, I mean, even like the ray tracing, it's small potatoes compared to everything else that we've been discussing. But we can just put it on screen that there is if you Forza Motorsport on PC, basically has a hidden ray tracing mode, right? So like the way Forza Motorsport on PC works is that, you know, you got low, medium, high, ultra settings. Apparently on the PC, you know, if you go to like where it's installed, like those have different folders, and inside those folders are XML files that determine like what's actually happening with that mode.
Oh, it looks
and
good,
basically outside of ultra there is a separate folder that is unused, and if all you really do is that you just take the files that are in that folder and copy paste them over the files that are in the ultra settings folder. And so then when you're in the game, as long as you're set to ultra, and then you copy those files across, you'll start using these new XML files. And what do? They add ray traced global illumination to when you're racing around, which which was a feature that was talked about before the game came out, but it's still not in the game. But this shows you that the files are there. It actually increases the draw distance. It improves things like grass as well. So like there's some scenes where if there's like just like a flat ground texture, it actually adds like grass you can see, like, you know, things in the object, like a stand, you know, like a spectator stand, right? Like in the ultra settings, default ones, you just see the stand if it's like a certain distance. But with this new visual settings, you'll see all the people in the stand. You'll see more detail in the background. So it increases the level of detail. Yeah, all this was in the game. And so Digital Foundry did a breakdown.
Wow.
There's obviously a performance hit, but it's only about 27% for like the third person camera view, but 40% when you go in camera, interior, you know, when you're in
those
cockpit.
polygons.
Yeah, there is like some issues with it. Like the reason why it's not an option in the game, I think, is because it hasn't been finalized, because there are some issues. There are noise levels of issues in some scenes. Night scenes particularly a bit of a problem with the ray trace global illumination, and there is like sometimes some visual glitches where it looks like your GPU is failing or something. There's basically some sort of rendering issue.
So,
but that could all be ironed out, I think.
I'm guessing this is coming to the game soon. It's just been discovered before it's been authenticated and verified.
Yeah, I think so, because the developers Turn 10 have talked about the PC version having ray trace global illumination, and they've released screenshots and footage of it before the game came out. And people have talked about how, you know, how like there's like the Ubisoft thing of like a visual downgrade, like what the game looked like before launch versus what it looked like at launch.
Yeah,
this was
infuriating.
This was what plagued Forza Motorsport on PC, was that when you're racing during the day, everything looks flat. It actually didn't look as impressive as like, hold on a second, the pre-release trailers and stuff like that looked really, really photorealistic. And then unless you're racing at like sunset or, you know, when lighting just looks really, really good anyway, you can fake that sort of stuff. So it actually launched without the ray trace global illumination, and it just looked a little bit flat and dull on PC. But even with this mode, like the ray trace global illumination does make an immediate improvement. Like
it looks crazy,
when you see like buildings, like what it does, it just like it makes things look more realistic. Like, you know, if it's a building and there's walls, it's like just the lighting looks realistic. And it's also as well, like if there's a bright red light, right?
Yeah.
Like let's say like you're driving around and the car in front of you breaks, and you'll see that red on the barrier. Like if it's close enough to the barrier, you'll see that reflected.
Yes.
That's global illumination, ray trace global illumination. What it does is like it takes the color of the light as well to change the surface material to make it look more realistic. So there is those examples in there as well.
Wow. What you said about the grass and it looking flat, I'm just looking at a default.
Yeah.
Like what it looks like default. It looks pancaked.
Yep.
And then as soon as the mod kicks in, it's just added volume to the grass.
Yeah, like the mod
depth to it.
The mod is you just like copy and pasting files that already exist in the game.
Just in the Digital Foundry video, they've got like default and then modded. But this is great.
It is technically modded, but it's not like you don't have to like change.
Yeah.
Like you're not like hacking the game. You're not like download a file from here and then add it to the game from there, or editing INI files, or just like modding settings to like you just actually just copy pasting.
Yeah. This is fantastic. We'll definitely update you guys on if this is rolled out. We usually cover new games getting ray tracing improvements.
If it is officially added to the game, I'll definitely post a news story on that. But
yeah, for sure.
I always find this is cool because like they found it. There was like a similar thing with like Capcom's games, like their games that run on the RE engine.
Yeah.
They found there was like a dev mode that actually added path tracing, which was like ray trace global illumination and ray tracing for different light sources, things like that. Yeah. That Digital Foundry did a video on as well, and that's like a game changer. But that also had like issues with noise and some like artifacting and things like that, because it's like a dev mode. It's like, they've got this mode in their games and there was a performance hit, but like it's not officially available. So it shows at least that that more and more developers actually having or are testing this sort of stuff, and there's just a matter of time before a lot of games kind of will start using ray trace global illumination as not as standard, but having it as an option for like, you remember like back in the days when you're changing your PC game settings, it was like, for ambient occlusion, it was like basic, then there's SSAO, and when you put like the most advanced version on, there'll be like that notable performance hit. And I think it's just going to be a similar situation where it's just going to be like normal GI and then ray trace GI and then ray trace GI Ultra will just be like the big performance hit, but it's just going to make the game look that much better.
Yep. I mean, I want all my games to have ray tracing, to be honest. I think it's so good. It's so good.
I think, ray trace GI is the one that is like, even if it's just like you see the side by side, you go, okay, yeah, I can see the difference. But that's one when you see it in motion, you go, okay. Yeah. It's like, okay, this one looks like, the only way to describe it is like it looks like a movie, or it's cinematic, or it's realistic, and one looks like a game, quote unquote, looks fake. Yeah. That's the way to separate it. And I think that's one of the ones that should definitely be one that developers use more and more.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think we're at 2 hours. I suppose that Windows story really did rinse us for this week's episode. Thank you if you've made it this far, thank you for sticking around for this extremely depressing episode of the Tweetown Show. We covered Windows outages, Intel's CPU meltdown, Zen 5 being delayed because it's potentially going to have problems. The
50 series being delayed.
50 series being delayed, and also the 4000 series reaching 100 degrees and cooking. And thank God we finished on some gorgeous game graphics with ray tracing being introduced to Forza, which it's almost like a palate cleanser after such depressing conversation of hardware failures and software failures. We'll try and make next week's episode a little bit more lighthearted. We'll see if this really is dependent on what the industry does. If Intel gets their stuff together, then maybe we'll have something positive to say about them. But until then,
see what happens.
They're under our boot for all intents and purposes.
Or they're under our microscope.
That as well. Your microscope, my boot.
Like I'm a bit more hands off. Like I'll keep my distance.
No, I'm right there. I'm up in their personal space. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm way too close. They're like, back up, sir. They put their hand on my chest. Like, hey, sir.
That's right.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for listening. As always, all of the stories that we talked about this week are in the description below in a Google Docs. We've also linked to that very interesting Eagles Lab story in there. I just put it in for further reading. That is very interesting if you're interested in the thermal paste and, cooking GPUs. There's some very maybe Reese, throw up some of these images and maybe quote Eagles Lab or credit Eagles Lab under the images in the video. Just looking at thermal paste under a microscope is bizarre.
It's crazy. Yeah, because it's funny because he mentions in there is like, I'm surprised nobody has done this, reported on this before, and it's like, well, I mean, look what you're doing, dude.
Yeah, what? I'm surprised.
Like, I'm not going to do that. Like, I'll just flat out say, yes, I'll review the GPUs, but I'm not going to be doing deep analysis on thermal paste compounds.
Yeah, who's going to think
what chemicals
to do that?
Make them up, and I'm sorry, that's just like not what I do.
It's just out of your wheelhouse entirely. All right, guys, thank you very much for listening. We will be back next week with another jam-packed week of tech news. Thank you very much, and goodbye.